Hello, my quilting friends. It is time for another Arabella Block of the Month video. And if you've been following all along, we are all ready to the interior border strips. Are you ready? Let's get stitching. Well, welcome back everybody to another wonderful tutorial right here at Stitchin Heaven. My name is Rob Appell, your quilt making host, and today, yes, we are working on Block of the Month, Arabella by Wing and a Prayer, and this has been an incredibly fun sew along. Folks, I think you can see this is a beautiful big batik quilt. Fabrics by Timeless Treasure, designed by the Wing and a Prayer Designs team, and super cool. And I've gotten a little bit of a head start, and I can do this with the borders. We're going to both do the interior two borders today. So we're on month number 11, and we'll do month number 12 next month, and we'll do the exterior two borders. And I'm going to work on a bonus quilting video as well as we go. Now, you have probably been following along with all the instructions out of the book, and if doing so, you've actually got all of your cutting information right up here for both month 11 and 12 on page 13 of the instructions. But we've broken it down and shipped it to you here at Stitchin Heaven in 2 different months. And it's easy sewing, but it's a long run because we're doing these long borders. So we don't have a lot to discuss or teach today, but I would like to try to offer a few tricks that should really help all of us have a nice accurate finish out to our quilt. And if you've never made borders on a quilt, traditionally what is done is there's measurements taken, you know, across the end of the quilt, the middle of the quilt, and the other end of the quilt to determine how long the border should be. And fortunately, because we have the instructions here, we are going to be starting with our fabrics from the strip number 8, which is the wonderful purple fabric. If I put it here, you probably can see it best. That's fabric number 8. These strips are cut at 2 inches wide. There were 8 strips of them. They're joined together and they are trimmed down. 2 of them are at 80.5 and the other 2 are at 83.5. And folks, one of the things that gets kind of challenging for quilt making in small spaces is how do we get those long border strips? So even on this last series, I've already cut it to size, and it's really nice to have it cut to size so that we can then, as you'll see here in a moment, clamp it in place or pin it in place along the quilt to make sure that we have a nice even feed of our border all the way through. But a lot of times, even in a small space like this, what I'll end up doing is taking my strip, and this particular one here, what I did is I folded it on the seam allowance. So I've already created my seam in here, and I folded it on my seam allowance, and that way I was able to measure from this point all the way down to 40.25 and trim it off because I was measuring for 80.5, if that makes sense for that long border strip. Okay, excuse me, and I'm actually sewing on the last of the 4 strips here so that I can get you caught up to the second part, and so that one's actually a little longer. But yes, your first of your purple strips or your fabric 8 strips is the 80.5. The second ones are the 83.5. Okay, so you can see that I actually already have a purple, we'll call it for now, border strip on one side and on the other. So now what I want to do is I get ready to put this quilt into the machine. First of all, and again, working in this kind of smaller space, I'm going to put the quilt up on my table as large and as flat as possible. Okay, and then I'm going to also go ahead and take my border and I'm going to lay it out. First thing I want to make sure, because I don't want to have to unstitch all of these stitches, I'm going to make sure I definitely have it right sides together. Okay, so I'm going to flip that over right away. I'm going to clamp it up at the top to begin with to make sure it stays right sides together. I'll just use these little clamps here that I love, my little plastic clamps from Stitchin Heaven. So I'm going to clamp at the top to keep things organized. Then I'm going to come down here, and again, I'm going to clamp somewhere near the middle, but I'm going to really start clamping from the back side or pinning from the back along the way as I go. We'll adjust if we need here. We know that should fall somewhere between those flying geese. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to lay it all the way out, and I'm going to start down here, making sure everything's right sides together. And I'm going to take a clamp or a pin, of course. I just think pins might be a little bit of a thing of the past. And I'm just going to make sure everything stays nice and flat as I work. And then probably about every foot, 2 shaka distances, something like that, we're just going to put another little clip. And I'm going to just kind of let that go all the way out. And this just really helps me keep my sewing pace as I'm stitching these long, long seams. Like I said, it's easy sewing, but there's a lot to it. And there's a lot of bulk and weight that will start to develop. Then I just keep working my way up the quilt. And again, if you wanted to do this on a floor, or of course somewhere where you can lay the whole quilt out, all the better. And as I come back towards that starting point, I'm just gonna kind of let the clamps get a little further apart, and I'm confirming that I've still got a real nice start to this. So I'm feeling real good where I'm at here. Here's the other maybe pro tip, maybe the best tip of the whole thing. Put the lid back on the clamps before we start manipulating all of this fabric on the table, because that's the next thing that can really happen, folks. We want to have the weight of the quilt, all of it, up on the table. We don't want anything to snag or anything like this while we're getting ready to do our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now as I come in here, I'm just going to remove that clip. I'm going to come in here, and definitely if you have the opportunity to set a needle down function on your machine, I'll do that first. I'm going to lower the presser foot. I'm going to turn on my needle down, and this just allows me to hold the fabric in place when I reposition my hands, because there'll be a lot of that. Now I'm going to take a couple stitches in place, back stitch to hold that union now, because we have a big seam. And I'm literally going to let the machine do as much of the work for me as possible. I like to sew about every 6 or 8 inches, or about every time I start to come into where one of those clamps is. And at this point, not only am I going to pull the clamp out of the way, but I'm going to, again, continually readjust the weight of the quilt. And a lot of you are probably doing this seated, so it's wonderful. You could accordion fold the weight of the quilt into your lap as well. And then I'm just going to remove the clip as I go. Just using my fingers now as little clamps away as I go along the way. And again, every few inches stopping, recalibrating, checking to make sure that nothing has gotten twisted or out of whack in any way. We're going to put on our 2 side borders first per color. And then we will put on our 2, excuse me, I said that wrong. We're going to put on our 2 sides, left and right, of this first color 8. Then we'll put on the top and bottoms. Once all 4 sides have the same color border around them, then we go to our left and right sides of the secondary color. That is going to be color 5 today. Again, lifting the weight off the table when necessary. Just allowing all of the weight of our big quilt now to feed through evenly. You don't want to be pushing or pulling on any of your corners, because that's what can cause the corners of your quilts to kind of run long and then be more challenging, especially on a long arm quilting machine. Oh, let's backstitch at the end here. And again, the next best thing I can offer as a good suggestion today is have a nice large ironing space as well. You'll notice I've removed my small wool mat, and now I'm going to use the full space here, and I'm going to press after each sewing. Sometimes our cords will get in the way, so I like to move my cords out of the way here, move everything else so that I have that opportunity to have the best possible seam allowance opening. And I'm just going to start on one end and press towards the other here. So as we finish pressing this out real quick, now as we get ready to use our color 5 fabrics here, we're going to have 83.5 inch seams again for the 2 of them, because they are now as short as the long sides, I guess, and we're working with a square, if that makes any sense. So again, you're going to cut and trim them down to fit and do the exact same thing so that you're able to piece them back into place. You can see, if anything, even in today's video, the sewing is simple, but the spatial management gets to be a challenge. Okay, so now I need to find where I've already pre-stitched on the second interior border there, that cool color 5. So I want to come 180 degrees over here and do the same thing. Checking to make sure that I have my right sides together. Placing my clip somewhere near the top. Placing a clip here close to the middle. And then I'm going to get the whole project organized from this lower side down here. Starting at the bottom. And it's always nice when you follow the instructions and you cut your piece to size and it fits so very nicely. So again, I'm just going to start the same exact procedure as before. And once I have this side on, I want to share with you another trick on how to handle some of these really big sized or these very long size seams that we need to be putting on, and how to get some easier cuts in math I figured out while working on this quilt here today. But I do need to get this on before I can show you that trick, so I will be right back. Now, as we get ready to tackle this last border together, I want to offer a few other tricks and maybe a slight disappointment, folks. I'm sorry, but I can see that we're all going to have to work together on a bit of a workaround here. And like I said, the instructions have been amazing up until this point, but what it says is we need to now get 2 outer interior borders, or our second here from our color 5 border, at 88.5. And that means that we need to be able to get strips here that are 44.5. And I really haven't met fabric that's workable over 43 inches in a long time. I was always taught to cut my selvages off of the end, and so I know already that this calculation is going to be darn near impossible to do out of 2 strips. So I went to my scrap bin and I cut myself another 3-inch strip, and chances are I will just really sew from one end to the other, clamping and clamping extra special along the way, and trim this edge off because it will be easier. But I did learn another trick that I want to share with you in calculating, and this works pretty dang cool, and you can do it over and over again. So let's say we needed 88.5, like we do, for the finished length now on this last border. Well, remember, folks, that's the finished length. We're going to have to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance between both of these strips. So from that, we're going to add 1/2 inch, 2 1/4 inch seam allowances. So now my 88.5 just jumped up to 89. Now, if I take that and I fold it on the folds, I'm literally thinking about 4 strips. So I'm going to take that 89 and I'm going to divide it now by 4, right? Because I had 2 strips now folded in half. So now I have 4 strips technically. We are not going to cut the fold. We are not going to cut the fold. Folks, we are not going to cut the fold. But technically then, if I took that 89 and divided it by 4, then each strip could be 22.25 inches long. So now what I would do is I would line that up, move my instructions out of the way, get a nice long ruler, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to find my 22.25 mark. And I'm going to put that right on my fold. And normally then I would be cutting the selvages off up here. But once again, confirming that we do not have enough material. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down to a number I can use, add in my little 3-inch patch strip in between them so it falls in the middle of the strip, and end up with my 88.5 inches of my finished length so that I can sew that in as my final strip for today. So okay, and now that I have it all clamped up and organized, I'm just going to take this last seam, again, getting all of the bulk up on the table here, head on into that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to take my time here as I put on this last seam. And the final few stitches, folks. Let's backstitch those on to secure them nice and firm, and there we have it. We have both of our interior borders on now. Our big, beautiful Arabella quilt by Wing and a Prayer Design. Folks, I have 2 more months for you. Like I said, next month will be month 12, and we'll finish putting on the last of the fabric borders, and I'm going to do a bonus video on quilting this, so I'm really excited to make sure I get this over on. I'm going to try to do it on a big long arm. I think that makes the most sense due to the size and nature of this big, wonderful project. Anyway, super excited to have been here today with all of you. I know you love our Block of the Month videos. Make sure you check out our website, stitchinheaven.com, where we are shipping between 6 and 8 new choices every month in our Block of the Month department. Many of them are pre-cut, so we get a lot of the harder work done for you so you can just enjoy the quilting and sewing process, folks. So anyway, so glad you were here today. We will see you next month as we wrap up this project in its entirety. Thanks again, and please stay well. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It really helps support our channel. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Hit the little button to be notified every time we go live or do a new video for all of you. And here's one from the past I think you'll really enjoy.